Yo, 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 welcome back to the Wrestling Strength Podcast. I am your host, Coach Myers, and I got a very special guest today. Great friend of mine, known for a long time, probably one of the first high-level athletes I ever started working with, training with ever, way back in the day. The man, Lance, the Party Palmer. What's up, Lance?
What's up, dude? It's awesome to be here. Glad to be back to see you. Obviously, we haven't seen each other in about 2 years or so it's cool to get back together, mix it up, get a nice little workout in too. So,
dude, it's wild how fast time starts moving. Like you blink and 2 years is gone. And think about how much has happened with you in the past 2 years since I've seen you.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's wild because like when we talk about it, 2 years doesn't seem that, like when we see each other, it's like, oh, it had to be a couple months or so. But
yeah, don't feel like there was any big passage of time.
Exactly. But like in the midst of your own life, you're like, man, so much has happened. Like 2 years from now, it's like I've had a bunch of fights in the last 2 years. Besides 2020, I didn't, but 2019 had a great season of fighting for PFL. 2020 was kind of, doing other business ventures because of COVID and, making a kid and then having a baby.
Yeah, that whole having a baby thing.
Yeah. 2021, having a baby the day before Valentine's Day, and then getting back into the cage again after a, 18-month layoff. And just like so many things have happened, but if you categorize it, it doesn't seem like a lot. You're like, okay, well, we did this over that time period. But when you really break it down, you're like, man, 2 years went by that fast.
Well, dude, and it just keeps going faster and faster. And, something my old man told me, he said, when you think back to when you're, 5, 6, 7, maybe, 10 years old, whatever. Remember how long the summers would feel?
Yeah.
They would feel so long, and a year felt like this incredibly long passage of time. But he said, well, when you're 10 years old, that 1 year is 1/10 of your experience on earth.
Yeah.
When you get to be 50, it's 1/50th.
Yeah.
So really kind of the way you view it through the lens of your collective experience, it's just a really short period. So even now, we're getting older. 2 years flies by like that. I mean, your daughter, how old's your daughter now?
She's 8 months yesterday.
So 8 months. So happy birthday to her. Dude, my daughter is going to be 12 in February.
That's crazy.
So I still remember her being that little girl, being a baby, then being a toddler. And dude, now she's 11. She loves Cardi B. She thinks I'm the biggest nerd on earth. Yesterday, for example, she came downstairs for something and I made some type of dad joke, messing with her. And these are the type of things when they were younger, they were hilarious. They'd be rolling on the ground, pissing themselves. Funny. She just rolled her eyes at me, ran back upstairs. She's FaceTiming with her friend on her iPad. I hear her slam the door, then I heard her repeat the joke. And she's like, oh my God, give me a break. She's up there making fun of
And you're like, wait a second. Yeah. When did I become the nerd in the house?
Yeah, I want to tell her you're not going to realize this 2 years later, but you might not even ever be friends with anyone as cool as your dad.
Exactly.
So you still got a lot of time before that happens, but it'll happen quick.
Oh, I'm sure. I mean, the cool part right now is my daughter, every time I come in the house and she's in the living room, either with the babysitter or my wife, and I look at her and just smile, she the biggest smile on her face. And you're like, you could have the worst day ever. And they just they love to see you no matter what. Especially the father-daughter relationship is my wife did all the work. She was pregnant with her. She did all the breastfeeding. She did the woman does all the work leading up to it. And
absolutely.
Right now, my daughter looks just like me, identical to me.
Yeah.
Every baby picture is spitting image. You can't tell which is which. And then you're every time that I'm around, she just loves being around me. And it's such a cool feeling, but I know it's going to go away. Everybody says that, they get to that age where it's you're still going to be the good guy because they're probably going to argue more with the mother when they're in high school.
For sure.
So you're still going to be they're still going to be daddy's girl, but as they get older, it's just not the same. They're not going to want to sit on your lap the same. They're not going to want to, be around you all the time. Your jokes aren't going to be as funny anymore.
Yeah, it changes, man. They go through different stages, and all the stages are great. And, even the stage you're at right now is awesome. Like you said, that you come home, you get that smile from them. But I think, as the dad, it gets better and better because, when you can actually play with them and do things with them and run around with them is when it gets really fun.
Yeah.
But it definitely changes. I mean, I'm still I'm as close with my kids as I've ever been. But like little things I've noticed, like Jack, when he comes in here now, like in the gym, he calls me dad instead of daddy.
That's cool.
Where at home, they still call me daddy.
Yeah.
But then when people are around, I'm like, hey, dad, give me that. And I'm like, who the fuck you calling dad? I'm
He
daddy.
gets that
you know?
one chest hair. He's like, hey, dad, give me a beer.
So kind
That's
of,
awesome.
kind of same thing with Mia. When I pick her up from, if I pick her up from school, I'm not allowed to like, I got to like be real nonchalant. I can't have the radio up loud. She got in the one day and it was like the normal like hip hop station, the stuff she likes. She's like, turn that down. What are you doing? I'm like, no one's paying attention. But in their mind, they think everything's like such a big deal.
Oh, yeah. But I think a lot of that now, like she's obviously old enough now where she realizes and knows enough about culture and things that are going on in the world now with social media that everything, and this may be an unfortunate thing for kids nowadays too, is everything that they do can be seen or commented on. And that's why I feel like they have to like walk around with such a target on their back for no reason.
Well, I'll tell you what, this will be an interesting conversation for us to have. You're probably the last generation that grew up without social media.
Yeah.
We didn't have it until we were already, older and in business and everything, but it's a huge part of my life now because it's how I run my business. But I think I see all the kids in the gym now that are growing up with social media. And like you said, everything they do can be commented on. It can be shared. There's all kinds of, I've heard Corey talk about with his kids, there's lots of like FOMO. They say, oh, well, this person's at that person's house and I wasn't invited. Like things back in the day, you would never know.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't out there.
Yeah. Like, hey, are the bikes in the front yard?
Right.
Oh, that's the only way you know.
But like with my kids, here's how I'm really the bad guy. I'm not letting them have phones till they're 16.
Nice.
And they're not allowed to have social media. Whereas their friends already have Snapchat. And I'm not allowing it. So it's one of those battles I've really dug in on. And if I got to be the bad dad and they hate me right now for it, I'm doing it. So, I just think it's going to be important for them to grow up and have somewhat of an authentic experience as far as like how they interact with kids. Now they do have a tablet that they use for school and they can FaceTime their friends like once a day. We'll let them do stuff like that. But the whole social media thing, like worrying about who liked what, who watched what, who commented on what, I just don't even want that entering into their mind until they're already maybe got a better sense of who they are as a person.
Yeah. And I agree with that. When they establish their individuality as who they are without all of that, then they can kind of have, because when you think about it, there's grown adults that only know themselves based off of their likes and, comments and posts. And it's like, oh, should I post this picture or not? It's, I look a little weird or whatever it is, or let me put a filter or do this or that. It's like, people do that just for their personal life.
It's warped people's sense and perception of who they are, for sure.
100%. I mean, like we talked about earlier, if that just disappeared, like how many successful people would there still be? You know what I mean? Like if you think about it, like if social media disappeared and that person's really just, they're a nobody, but they post a bunch of pictures, or that girl just posts a bunch of pictures of her ass in a thong and then it goes away. People are like, oh, well, that chick, I only followed her because of her ass. Like she didn't do anything for me business wise.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, but we also have businesses and our livelihood is kind of based around social media. So we use it as something to help us. It's not something that we have to live by.
Well, I think too, it's kind of skewed people's perception of what it means to be successful. So like you using that example, like, and not knocking girls with nice asses, because that's great. I think
everybody needs that.
Everyone needs that in their life, or to look at on their phone or whatever. But does it, if you have a bunch of followers just because of that, but you're not really offering any type of value, or you can't really monetize it into something long term, is that really success? You know? And I think, I'll see people that maybe I kind of loosely know. They're posting all this stuff about how they're like a real estate guru or something. I'm like, you don't even own your own house. How are you a real estate guru? You know? Yeah. So I think that, and I'll kind of tie this back to you, for example. There might be people that don't really know you. Maybe they know you just from the PFL now, something a little bit more recent. And they see like, all right, this guy, he's winning $1 million on New Year's Eve. Oh, I'm seeing his post. He drives a Lamborghini. He must be so lucky. It must be so nice, whatever they think. But one of my favorite posts I've ever seen of yours was of you on a tractor out in California. Yeah. And I think that's a side that a lot of people don't know. Like, you didn't just wake up one day and be this millionaire fighter who drives a Lamborghini.
No.
You know, so tell the story behind the tractor picture.
So the tractor picture is actually 2011 and maybe 2012, one of those summers when I first started training in California. So basically, right when I graduated 2010, Ohio State, that very next wrestling season, 10-11, I was a volunteer coach at Virginia Tech. So basically, they brought me in, paid me to coach there for the season, and I still wanted to compete. So it was kind of like I did it because I love wrestling and I loved coaching, but I wasn't going to stay in the sport as an athlete. I wanted to get into MMA because I still want to coach wrestling at some point when it's all said and done, but my competitive life isn't over yet. So at that point, I was like, all right, I'll coach at Virginia Tech. After the season was over, Philadelphia was where the national tournament was that year. I came back from that to Virginia, put all my stuff in a storage unit, and basically my clothes were all in black garbage bags, threw them in the bed of the truck that I had at the time, drove up to Cleveland where my parents live, and I was like, hey, I'm driving out to California. And my youngest brother, Jordan, was still living at home at the time. And I was like, you want to ride with me? I'll buy your flight back to Cleveland, you know, by the time we get there over the weekend. And he was like, yeah, you know, whatever. I don't have anything going on here. It was in April. So drive out to California in my truck, literally all I had. Like I had less than, I probably had like $600 or $700 in my name at that time.
Probably almost all of that's going to buy your brother's flight back home.
Pretty much, yeah. I think his flight one way was like $350 at the time, and then you think of all the gas and food it took to get there, and basically I was going there as like Uriah Faber was basically like, hey, we'll hook you up, we'll put you up at a house, we'll do this and that. And I was like, okay. So I was basically just thinking that I was going to have at least a little bit of money coming in when I got there. So we get there, I move into this, basically a garage that was made into a bedroom. Like the wall where the garage door was turned into drywall, and I basically lived in a garage. When my wife showed up there the first time, she was like, I can't believe you live like this. Like, it was literally like bare bones. Like, it wasn't even my bed. It was another bed and somebody else's sheets that I was sleeping on.
It was a van down by the river, basically.
Basically, yeah. And it was in Sacramento, California. And I was like, I'm chasing a dream. Like, I don't know if it's going to work out or not, but I have faith in myself that I could be good at this sport. And so that summer, like, I had a truck, obviously, so I could do some mowing, and my buddy owned a company that they had all the Bank of America foreclosed homes on their accounts. So basically, you mow for them, you mow the lawns, some of them you'd clean the inside of the houses, take pictures of everything so they could send it to Bank of America so you could get paid. So, and they were nothing. Like, I was probably making like $30 on each property. So I'd have to do
hustling.
Yeah, hustling to try and make enough money to even pay for gas and food, and you know, I think it was like $300 or $500 a month in that garage. So I was like, so it wasn't what I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, basically 10 lawns just to pay for your garage unit you're sleeping in.
Exactly.
The storage, essentially like a storage unit.
Yeah, so you're trying to, on top of training, I'm trying to get like 10 lawns a day, or I would do like 3 or 4 days a week of just lawn work or lawn care. So the tractor job ended up being one of the bigger jobs. It was just a property, and they needed the property mowed. Like, the grass was like 3 feet tall, and it was like you needed, like, this was like a mower tractor. I needed like a tractor to really do this. It took me like 4 hours. There's dust everywhere, and I was just like, I had like a mullet because I was growing my hair long at the time. And that picture was Jessie, because she was sitting in the truck because she was actually in town. I don't even know if she lived there yet, because she's a dental hygienist still in Columbus when I first moved out there. So she was sitting there with me, and it was a weekend. It was like a Saturday, and I borrowed some other guy's trailer and mower because I only had a push mower of my own. And
yeah, I remember the tractor. It wasn't like one of those like big industrial ones you see guys like a zero turn. It was like a little like lawn boy that you see like.
Yeah, it was like a Toro, like 30-inch or something riding mower, and it was just like.
It looks like the one from like Family Guy or something.
Yeah, basically. And that's what it was. And it was, so that picture came across as a memory from like, I mean, now it had to be 10 years ago. And I had posted something about that last year, I think. And I was like, you know, this is where my dream started. Like, mowing lawns just to be able to pay the bills, to be able to train to be able to get a fight. Like at that time, I wasn't even making money fighting. My first fight was like maybe $1,500, but by the time you have your training camp and your coach's fees and your manager's fees, like you probably lose money.
Yeah, it's nothing at that point.
Yeah, it's literally just to build your record up at that point. So at that time in my life, I was like, I have literally nothing to my name. Like the furniture that I own is the only thing I have in my name. We were renting an apartment. Jessie was making great money at the time, but not enough to support both of us, and I would never want her to do that anyways. So that's why I was mowing and doing all that outside of training every day. So, I mean, it's weird because when you come full circle, I own a landscape and snow removal business now, but the level of it is just so different because now it's more of a supplemental income, and I have so many great people in Columbus area that I do work with and subcontract with, and you know, guys like Kenny Vaughn and Andy Strutman who have had their own businesses and own their own businesses who either need me to help with some of the jobs or, you know, subcontract some of the work out to me. So it's definitely changed full circle, but it's also like people laugh at me because I'll still go out and do the mowing jobs instead of like sending a guy out to do it, when it's like, if you really think about it, for me, I'm saving myself, you know, $15-$20 an hour by doing it by myself if I can. You know, if I'm in town and I can do it, yeah, I'll go mow. One of my high school teammates, he was a heavyweight at St. Ed's, Kevin Quinn. He owns a property up in Galena that I mow like once a month. They're still building on it. And I'll be the one mowing most of the time. I've sent a couple people out to do it, but I like doing it, and I feel that it's that blue collar mentality. And I don't ever want to get away from that because that's who I am. That's where I've grown up. I grew up in the country. I grew up under hard work and calloused hands, you know?
Well, that's what it made me think of when I saw that picture of the tractor. I think, well, this is why Lance is so successful in so many different areas, not just fighting, but your personal life and, you know, your other businesses you have, because you're the same guy as the guy that was on that tractor.
Yeah.
You know, you're not this, you know, you're a guy that has a Lamborghini now, but really that's just stuff that you have. It's not who you are. That's not your identity.
Exactly.
You know, I think so people kind of, it gets convoluted as far as like who you are as a person once you become successful. And I think that blue collar mentality, that grit, that's like the ultimate key to success. And I feel like if you don't have, or I don't know how people that don't have that can become successful, you know, because I think it's so tied to like everyone I know, whether it's you, Corey, myself, anyone I know, my guy Smitty, the Carpet King. I mean, These are blue collar guys. And, you know, when you went out there to Sacramento, you were a household name in the wrestling world already. Mm-hmm. You know, you were a legendary high school wrestler here in Ohio, 4-time champ, you know, Big Ten champion, 4-time All-American. People knew who you were, but no one was handing you anything. There was no like red carpet rolled out for you into the fighting world. No. You know, you still had to literally earn it every day.
I did. And a lot of that, actually, what you just said was really good, is I had to earn it every day in a room of killers, of like Chad Mendez, TJ Dillashaw, Chris Holdsworth, Uriah Faber, Joseph Benavidez. Like, these were all guys that were making it at the time in the WEC and UFC. And
all Hall of Famer type guys.
Yeah. And I was just like, I knew what I could do based off of what I did in the room, but without showing that in a fight, you really don't get that type of clout or, you know, respect. So it took me almost, you know, 7-8 years to really, I mean, I'd say maybe 6 years to really earn a living in the sport. And to get to the point where I could pay my bills and be like, okay, well, I don't have to figure out what I'm going to do next month. You know, that was 6 or 7 years probably before that.
Well, I remember, I think it might even been your first fight. It was at like the Ohio State Fairgrounds. It was in a big barn.
My 4th pro fight.
Oh, that was your 4th pro fight.
Yeah.
All right, so you had some out in California first.
Yeah, that was still my only fight in Ohio to this date, unfortunately.
No kidding.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think I met you in 2010. It would have been your senior year. Mm-hmm. At the time, I was training Tommy Rollins.
For the Olympics.
Yeah, for the Olympic trials, which were coming up. He'd just come out of retirement. And I remember, you know, we were out there one day, and like I think like he wanted to do like some boxing one day, so I like had him hitting some mitts or whatever. He was terrible, but he was huge, and he was just like breaking my arms off basically. And you know, which it was awesome working with Tommy. But I remember him saying, he's like, are you familiar with Lance Palmer? And I was like, basically at that time I was kind of loosely following Ohio State wrestling, but the two guys I definitely knew were Tommy and you.
Yeah.
You know, I'd followed you all through high school. You really like, and this was kind of at the beginning of the internet, and there was like, you know, stories out there like, oh, this guy wrestles bears. They train like savage. I remember the first time I saw you wrestle in high school, I was like, this guy looks like a man among boys.
Well,
He's
you
just
worked
like,
out. You did a lot with the Watkins guys too, so they had a decent upbringing of guys too, didn't
yeah,
they?
around that time they did.
Yeah.
They had a pretty good. It was when Eddie Jane was the coach.
Yeah.
So St. Ed's connection there.
Yep.
Yeah, that time. Watkins did have a good little run around then. So, but anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. But I remember Tommy said, "Hey, like, you familiar with Lance? Like, would you be interested in like helping him? You know, he's thinking about moving to California to start fighting. He's never like outside of like maybe knocking a guy out in the bar and on High Street. He's never thrown any punches or anything.
Yeah, never boxed.
Yeah, he's never boxed or anything. I said, well, yeah, sure, bring him out. So you came out a little bit that summer. You know, we did some mitt work and some bag work and stuff. And I felt like, you know, I gave you at least enough so that like you understood how to stand and things like that.
Oh yeah.
And so then that way, when you went out to Team Alpha Male, it wasn't your actual first day, you know, kind of lacing up. But I remember then you were out there for maybe a year or so. Then you came home for Christmas one time and, you know, you hit me up to work out or whatever. And just like the amount of levels that you jumped in that 1 year, like being out there with high level coaches from the time I'd boxed with you the summer before, it was like mind blowing.
Yeah, I think, and I remember that too. I think it was actually the time I came home during the Arnold one time, and I think Travis Brown was here, and we were working out at Old School, and we were in that workout room, and I was just like, it was just crazy because I remember the first time you held pads for me. I think Maurice Claret was there. We were in the boxing ring when it was still.
Oh
in
yeah,
the
I forgot about that.
Yeah, so it's like I can remember stuff like that, but I can't remember what I did 20 minutes ago. It's so weird. But it's like stuff like that is what I like. Those are the memories that are cool because you were probably. I took like a boxing course at OSU as an elective, like an 8-week class or whatever. I don't remember who the coach was or anything, but I didn't even know what stance I was going to be at that point. Like I knew I was lefty, but I didn't know if I was going to fight southpaw or not. And then you had held pads for me a bunch of times before I actually went out and trained at Alpha Male and kind of got my feet moving a little bit and just got like the shoulder movement going. And we did a lot of work just in that short period of time. And it's like that little base, you know, it actually helped me going into training with those guys just to learn because it's like I had no background whatsoever before that.
No, I remember us hitting pads for the first time, and you definitely punched like a wrestler at first. You leaned forward. You didn't understand how to twist your hip because it feels really foreign to a wrestler. Like every wrestler at first, when they try to punch, they want to lean with their head into the punch.
Like
because
you're
that's
taking a shot.
Like you're taking a shot, exactly. When you do that, you're going to run into an uppercut or a right hand or whatever. So I felt like we could at least kind of try to correct some of that stuff so that way it wasn't, you know, Garbrandt and Benavidez correcting it by like just punching you in the face.
Exactly. Definitely. It's crazy though how it just each time, like how you said, like the leaps and bounds you make just training with people that are at that level. And that's what's like I didn't have a choice. You're sparring with those guys, like you either got to level up or you're just going to get beat up. It's like so it was easy for me to make those leaps and bounds in training throughout those short time periods because of that. So it's, I mean, getting back to what you were saying about that fight at the fairgrounds in Columbus, that fight was actually like that guy that I fought was actually a tough dude. I think he was like 7-2 at the time. He was like one of the bigger name guys in Columbus.
Yeah, regionally, he was a pretty big name at the time.
Yeah. So, I mean, at that point, being my fourth pro fight, it was a really good fight to take because I knew he was tough. I'd actually trained with him at Buckeye MMA before I even started fighting. I was still wrestling, and I just went over there to roll one time. So it was like that fight and the toughness of that guy and his grit and his experience.
Yeah, he was definitely a seasoned pro. You know what I mean?
And
sure.
it was awesome because I got to show that even though I had little experience in the fight game, I got to show that, you know, I was better than that guy who had been training for however long and just fighting. So it was, those are the fights that are cool though, like the come up fights. Cause then you're just like, people still have a target on your back, but people don't really know like, okay, is this guy going to do well? Is he not going to do well? Like those are the fights where you're like, I got to prove myself to get to that next level.
Well, I think kind of the sense probably I can't remember that guy's name, but from his guy,
John Washington, I think.
John Washington. I think probably kind of the sense of like those guys in his camp, they were still looking at it as like, hey, I'm the MMA fighter. Lance is just a wrestler, and he's probably going to fizzle out. He's just going to be a wrestler trying to fight.
That's exactly what he said before the fight.
Yeah.
He's like, well, this ain't a wrestling match. I was like, all right. And then I shredded his leg up with leg kicks the whole cage.
Right.
So it was like, I knew that the skill level was there, but people didn't at that time.
So something else kind of funny and random I remember about that fight is I remember wherever I was at, I was kind of close to cage side or whatever, but like on like the row right next to me, I remember looking over and going like, wow, there's Logan Stieber and Reese Humphrey. And I like had no idea like I'd be working with those guys like a year later or whatever.
It's
but
crazy.
It's kind of just like a wild like memory I have of like seeing them and think like, whoa, Reese Humphrey, like, and then
the next thing you know, you're training with them.
Yeah, we ended up becoming great friends and training together for a lot of years. So let's kind of peel it back a little bit further. We've talked about, kind of that blue collar grit, obviously your work ethic, your toughness, kind of, the movie had been made about you and your brother, in high school, Pinned, so you guys already had kind of a glimpse into the way you guys grew up and the way you trained. Something I like to talk about with everyone on here, because it is the Wrestling Strength Podcast.
Yeah.
So we don't necessarily need to talk about strength training, but I do like to talk about kind of the whole nature versus nurture thing. Your dad was like kind of a legendary savage, like the way he trained you guys.
Mm-hmm.
And so do you think, kind of the way you guys grew up? First, I mean, maybe we should talk a little bit about how you guys trained growing up, what you did, and whether you think that like, was that definitely what molded you, or was it kind of like you were the type of kid that was already kind of built for that, and, placing that over top of already being a tough kid, like that's why you had such great success with it?
Well, I think to start with that entire thing is,
I gave you a lot there. I know.
Well, no, I think everything, like, we can go through as kind of chronological order, kind of as when I was a little kid. I mean, even now, like when I don't know people, I'm pretty quiet, a pretty to myself person. Once I get to know people, then I'm, myself, and I'm funny, and I'm the party, and I like to have a good time, and whatever, and I'm louder. But when I don't know people, or when I'm just being myself, I'm pretty introverted, pretty quiet person. So as a kid, I was never like that super hyper kid in school, or like somebody who needed to get energy out or whatever. Like I got really good grades all the way up through high school. I was always really focused on the task at hand. I was just determined, no matter what I did, I was determined to do well at it, or try to do well at it. So before I even started wrestling, I did karate, and I started karate when I was 5 years old. And it was just, my parents put me in it to see if I would like it or not. And I stuck with it for, 4 years, basically, until I found wrestling. And I really like karate. I like the discipline in it, and I like the ability to basically earn your stripes in a way. But it was different, because it was, in karate, you earn your stripes by performing a kata, or a routine in front of judges. And if you do it well enough, then you can win tournaments and things like that. And you can get promoted stripes or belts by your sensei. And I got to a point when I started watching, because Colin, my younger brother, started wrestling before I did. He started when he was 5.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So I was actually doing karate while he started wrestling, because they put him in karate for a minute, and then you think he kicked his teacher in kindergarten or something, and then they were like, all right, we got to put this kid in a different sport. So that's like,
I think any of Colin's athletes that are watching, they probably are not totally surprised by that.
Most people that know him aren't surprised by that at all. So my next thing was, my dad, him growing up, he wrestled for a couple of years. He wasn't serious in wrestling at all, but he knew people in Strongsville, Ohio, who were coaching the Southwest Y wrestling club, the Mini Mustang Club. And so they took Colin there. He started training with them. And Coach Ashley Swift, he was a really well-known coach in that area for kids. And so the funny thing about that, as you go into that club, is like, that's where Mike Basillo came up. That's where a couple other bigger name guys from Northeast Ohio came up. And Colin was in there training, and he excelled really fast with the sport. Like, he was a natural in wrestling. And anybody that knew him knew that he was super skilled as far as just wrestling went. And for me, I was like, man, wrestling sounds cool. Like I was into karate. I was a purple belt in karate. And my goal would have been to, to do it today. I wouldn't have changed anything, but it would have been cool to get my black belt in karate and stay in it with wrestling. But it was just too hard to do both at that time at a serious level. So on my 9th birthday, my dad got me a pair of wrestling shoes, and I went to my very first wrestling practice. And even though I was getting kind of beat up by the kids that were 9 years old because they'd been wrestling since they were 5, I was like, man, this is awesome. Like, I had so much fun doing it because I could just learn, like anything I put my mind to, I can learn however fast I need to, I feel, to get to where I need to be. And that was kind of my mindset, even at that young age of like, well, they've only been doing it for 3 or 4 years. I'm sure I can catch up by, 2 or 3 years in. And so I basically 6 months into wrestling, I told my sensei, I was like, hey, I'm going to go into wrestling. I feel like the one-on-one, like mano-a-mano mentality is more of what I need instead of like the routine type thing. And learning the skills of karate was cool, but at that time I was like, when am I ever going to use that? And so,
do you think you would have liked karate better if you actually got to like karate fight other kids? Like if it was more instead of the katas, it's like, hey, here's a tournament, you go and you fight.
Well, we got to spar and practice, but at that young age, I was like, I don't really want to do this. Like we got to spar here and there, but you could only touch.
Yeah.
So it was like going into wrestling for some reason was just more of like, I get to like, my mindset probably wasn't this, but now it's like I get to dominate another person as like showing them that I'm better at this sport. And so in karate, you could do something a certain way, but your style may not look as good as someone else's.
Well, it's too subjective.
Exactly, because it's a judged thing. It's not like now they have sport karate fighting where you can actually fight karate. But back then, I was never doing that. It was always just like the classes, and I was like, I want to compete. And so the wrestling is what did that for me, and I got into wrestling and got serious about it right away because my brother had already been doing it for 2 years at that point when I started, or yeah, maybe 2 years at that point. So my dad was like, well, if you guys want to get serious and start wrestling at out of state level or national level or whatever, we need to start taking it more serious. We need to go to more practices, get with the better coaching, all around Northeast Ohio. And we first started by doing 30 push-ups every morning in their bedroom, my parents' bedroom. We just get in there on the carpet, do 30 push-ups together every day. It started as just push-ups, 30 push-ups
So would
a day.
he like wake you and your brother up and say, hey, it's time for push-ups, or were you guys like jumping out of bed ready to do them?
Honestly, I mean, we were excited about it, but I don't remember if that was like what the case was. It was more of like we just knew every day, whether it was before bed or, when you woke up, we would do 30 push-ups together. And it was fun because we all did it. Like if my dad was in there, we all did it, and it was only 30 push-ups. Like as a kid, you don't really think of that as being hard. You just like do whatever your dad's doing because it's cool.
But it's building kind of that consistency of doing some type of strength work.
Yeah, and subconsciously, that was what it was, and we didn't think of it that way. And I don't even know if my dad thought of it that way at first. But then we got to the point where we were doing 50 push-ups, then 100 push-ups, then sets of 20 or 30 push-ups for, 10 sets or whatever. And then we started adding pull-ups in. And it got to the point where we were doing full workouts. Like it was a 45-minute workout because we would do, 10 or 15 pull-ups. I don't remember what we started at, but you do, say, a set of 10 pull-ups, then a set of 50 push-ups, and then a set of 50 sit-ups. And you do, 10 sets of that, and that was your workout for the day. So we were in the base. We took it down to the basement. We had one of those doorway pull-up bars, and then we do pull-ups on. That thing was it might still be hanging. It ended up being my bedroom. It was our old playroom in the basement, but it was all taped up from us just, because it was just a metal bar.
It's one of those ones you like twist.
Yeah, you got to tighten it up. Yeah. So it ended up having like loads of tape on it, and we used that every day for years. I mean, we did pull-ups, push-ups, sit-ups, and it got to the point where we were doing, 200 pull-ups in a workout, 2,500 push-ups. We'd be doing sets of 250 on push-ups, and then we'd be doing sets of 100 sit-ups. And it's like you get to a point where you're like, you can do push-ups all day long, and you're a little kid,
Yeah.
if I'm 12 years old and I weigh 70 pounds or whatever it was at that time, it's like, if you have any sort of strength at all, you can do push-ups all day long and it's not hard. Like you're just like it gets hard to a certain point just because you're cardio at that point. You're doing 2,500 push-ups. You're like, you better have some sort of cardio by then. But it got to the point where we had to start incorporating some sort of weight training in or weight vests. So we started doing stair workouts in our basement stairs. We had a treadmill at that point, doing incline sprints, 30-30s, then an Airdyne bike, 30-30s, and then, incorporating all three of those together for cardio workouts on top of practice and school and lifting. So it kind of just grew to a point of where he saw that we were able to do that, so he added a little bit more. And then we were able to do that, so he'd add a little bit more. And learning from high school coaches and college coaches, and obviously making it small enough to where he wasn't pushing us outside of our limits as far as lifting super heavy weights at 12 years old or whatever. But weight training, because everybody's like, oh, that's probably what's going to stunt your growth. And it's like, no, my mom's 4'11". That's what's going to stunt my growth. It was
Right.
I was never going to be tall no matter how you cut it. So us doing these workouts and training, and like, it helped in every sense of the way. Like, it helps your mentality. It helps your toughness. It obviously helped on the mat with your strength. Like, I was never really in a wrestling match where I was like, man, that guy felt super strong. Like, there were guys that were strong, but I always felt like I had the strength department covered. And conditioning, even, just because of the things that he pushed us through, is like, every time we had to do workouts, my brother would be throwing up in the trash can. And he thought that would get him out of the workout. And my dad would be like, all right, once you're done throwing up, get back on the bike or the treadmill. And he'd be like, start crying again. It's like Colin was the one that was always crying every time we did either strength or conditioning workouts. And it wasn't that I liked it. It was just that I knew that's what I needed to do to be able to be better than everyone else.
Well, I think something very important that you said that I hope doesn't get lost on all the dads and coaches that are listening right now is that, okay, so like you guys ended up doing an insane amount of workload even by the time you were like a teenager or even junior high or whatever. By the time the volume you were doing was incredible. But you said your dad recognized that you guys were able to handle it.
Yeah.
You guys didn't start out, lifting for 2 hours a day when you were 6 years old or whatever.
No.
You started with 30 push-ups.
Yeah.
You started doing that, and you guys liked it. And I think you had the foresight and kind of the maturity to be able to look at it and say, this is what I need to do to get better than all these other kids. And you recognize that at a young age. Most young kids do not think like that.
Yeah. And I don't know if that was just the way I've always thought, but it, like, intellectually, maybe I was just like already at that point where I was like, man, I like noticing other kids and what their abilities are. Because I was like, man, I'm okay at soccer. I'm never going to be a soccer star. It was more of doing it for conditioning to lead into wrestling season. So things like that is like I used other sports to help my wrestling grow. And I was actually better at baseball than any other sport. But the politics in it drew me away from it by the time I was in 8th grade.
I fucking hate baseball.
Dude, I was really good at baseball. And I wanted to go to Arizona State for baseball. This is when I was a little kid. Like, I already knew what I wanted to do. But then as politics grew and like you lose positions or have to sit the bench, even though you're better than the guy that's out there, I was like, screw that. Wrestling, I can show that I'm the starter and I'm the better guy. If that guy thinks he can beat me, let's go a match and see if he can beat me. So that's kind of where that mentality came in, and from doing other sports where the politics took over and all the other guys on the infield were the coaches and they were the dads of the kids that were in the infield. And you're like, dude, screw all these people. Like, it's not the kid's fault. It's the parents who were like, oh, well, my kid wants to play shortstop and my kid wants to play first base. And my dad wasn't a coach because he would have told him off. And that was kind of how it went. And I was just like, but the mentality of it was always, I knew that I needed to do this to be where I was at or to get where I wanted to be. And it wasn't, trust me, I didn't like doing it. I never liked, like, coming home from practice and then my dad would be out of town for a bear show or something and my mom would have the clicker, watching our stairs. Every time we came up was a stair, we'd have to do 50 or 100 rows of stairs. And it was like, that stuff I didn't want to do at 8 o'clock at night before bed, but I did, and it gradually compounded and got me to where I'm at today, basically.
Well, I think then, you've kind of proven that it's a combination of both nature and nurture. You know what I mean,
100%.
obviously your environment, helps shape you, that blue collar, hardworking environment. Your dad having you do all these workouts, and even your mom, like you said, timing you on the steps
Yeah.
at 8 o'clock at night.
Yeah.
But I think that wouldn't have worked if you weren't already the type of individual that you are. Number one, a tough kid. Number two, a kid that was able to have the foresight to say, hey, I need to do this to get better. Because most kids, they do not think like that.
Yeah.
So I think, this is kind of like the perfect storm of, a champion being built. You look at your resume, 4-time state champ, 4-time All-American, Big Ten champion, 2-time world champion in the PFL MMA.
Yeah.
And now something we haven't even touched on, you just won a world title in jiu-jitsu.
Yeah. Yeah. So I won.
It's like this guy wins everything. He's so lucky.
Well, yeah. Well, the thing is too, is like this year was a rough year outside of sports for me, like just family wise. So going into this season of PFL, basically after a 1.5 year layoff on top of all that, it was, having a kid born in February and then having my dad in rehab during that same exact time period. And then my grandma passing away in July of this year. So there was a lot of things outside of fighting that took my focus away from it. So I felt like not having the best performances that I could have had in my last 2 fights during this season of PFL, I needed to get back to that competition. And obviously going to the Worlds for Jiu-Jitsu as a brown belt, you're going to have some tough guys. And I was like, that's a competition I need. Win, lose, or draw, it gives me another way to outlet my competition, because I'm not going to fight until, probably spring or whenever next season is of PFL. So I was like, I'm going to go out and compete, and I'm going to train for it, and it's going to give me something else to focus on, because that competitive mentality inside me is like, I'm not just going to sit for a year on those 2 losses. And obviously the losses of, family members and things like that outside of it too, with the positives of the year of my daughter being born and my dad being sober and things like that. There's a lot of, like, it's a mentality, like we talked about. It all goes back to your mentality. You could be the victim mentality, say, oh, well, this guy doesn't have to deal with this, or they don't have to deal with this, or this was given to them. It's more of like, what can I take out of this negative thing and make positive of it? And that's kind of where the no-gi worlds came in for jiu-jitsu, was like, I'm training just to stay in shape for my fights, and I'm doing really well with these guys who compete at the top level and black belt at the world level. Why not go in and do this? And obviously it took some help from them of like, hey, you should do the worlds. Like, you're already training. Just do a couple more days a week of training, focus in, dial in, and let's get it. And I was like, all right, that's cool. I was like, I'm not cutting any weight for this. I'll just go what I weigh. And went out there and won 4 matches, had a submission in my semifinal match. And I was just like, it was a lot of fun. It was an awesome time competing. Obviously, I was able to go out and win gold. And then my original jiu-jitsu coach, he was there to be able to coach me through all my matches, also with the local guys who'd been helping me out this last couple months. And so I got promoted on the podium to my black belt. And I was just like, that was an awesome weekend. And I expect a lot out of myself, but I've never competed in a tournament for jiu-jitsu, for IBJJF. So the rule system, that was my first time with point scoring and rules and everything else that I've ever had to go through for a tournament structure. And to go out for my very first tournament in jiu-jitsu at a high level, at the world level, and win it was, I don't want to say that I'm surprised, because I expect that out of myself. But to be able to do that with literally no experience in that other than fighting, which is a lot different style of grappling, it was awesome. And it brought a lot of positivity back into my mindset and kind of refocused me as like, you're a top dog no matter what you do, because you put your mind to it. And that goes back to that kid's mentality that I had when I was 9, saying that I can catch up with these guys because I have the mentality. And obviously the athleticism and things like that, you have to have some of that. But I won't say I'm the most athletic person there is. I worked really hard to get strong and conditioned and be able to do the things that I am able to do. So, like, there's a lot of people, oh, well, you're just naturally. No, naturally gifted is my brother. Colin was the most naturally gifted person in wrestling I've ever met in my life. And with the right mentality, he could probably still be one of the most gifted wrestlers ever. And that's kind of why I look at that is I had to go from not being a great natural wrestler to competing with him every day in the room, even though we weren't the same weight, we didn't wrestle each other or anything like that. Is like we had that brotherly competition of like, okay, he's winning Tulsa Nationals, I'm taking third. What do I need to do different? He's winning the Trinity Award, I'm not. What do I need to do different? Like, it was always him pushing me indirectly, but we were always, we drill in the basement together. We were like 10 pounds off, a couple of years off, but we would drill together all the time, go to Jordan camps, go to Churto camps, work with the best coaches in the area. All that stuff is, you have to want to do that. Obviously, not every kid wants to. My youngest brother, Jordan, didn't want to do that, and he didn't wrestle. He was really good when he did wrestle, but he didn't want to go to all those practices and do all that. He wanted to hang out with his friends and do things that kids do.
He just wanted to be a kid.
He wanted to be a kid, exactly. And I was able to make it work to where I could still have good friendships with kids that I still have today. Like some of my friends come to my fights from middle school that I was never able to hang out when I was at wrestling tournaments. And that was just, the mentality is like, yeah, there were times where I'd miss friends' birthday parties in 7th grade or like miss certain dances or things I wanted to go to. But in the large scheme of things, is like, I'm glad I missed out on that stuff because I was still able to have a childhood and still able to be great at something that I really love doing. And it brought me to this point that I'm at. And obviously, things have to go your way a little bit. Like, NCAA tournament is a prime example of that, where you can be the best guy in the country, but you have to be the best guy in the country on those 3 days of that tournament. No other time of the year matters.
You got to be perfectly healthy. Everything has to really line up.
And you have to get some calls.
Right.
You have to get everything has to go your way. It doesn't matter how good you are. Like, you could slip on a banana peel on the way out there if you're the best guy in the world, tear your knee, and lose a match by 1. Like, that's just the way it goes. Like, you're never going to be, like, now I feel like some of the weight classes are skewed to where there's one really good guy, then the rest are a few behind him.
Well, I think, you're seeing at the high school level a lot. There's kids now that are getting identified earlier as being elite, and they're training at RTCs.
Yeah.
They're training at, like with the top, there's so many more club opportunities. Like your brother, for example, he's got one of the top clubs in the country now.
Yep.
So these kids that are really good are training with a Colin Palmer from a very young age.
Yep.
So they're getting to college almost more of the finished product. That's why you see them even, doing well internationally. Gable Stevenson, winning the Olympics as a college guy. Kyle Snyder winning the Olympics as a college athlete.
You're exactly right with that too, because even though I would go work with high school kids when I was in 8th grade, they were just local high school kids, not necessarily the best of the best in high school when I was in middle school. So it's evolved so much to where when they get to college, they are way sharper of a wrestler than I was. I had so much to learn when I went to college. And even though I could still do well in the room when I first went there, that doesn't necessarily mean that I could have done well at the NCAA level stepping right on campus. It took me 4 months to get where I was, let's say, all-American quality of college wrestler. And thanks to my coaches, like that was Joe Heskett, Lou Roselli, Tom Ryan, like all of them just putting everything they had into me from that point. But now guys are getting there with that ability, like the Surianos and the Snyders and Stieber and guys like that. Like Stieber even did a lot of the stuff that we did growing up. Like Stieber's dad was always picking my dad's brain, and we were doing we called it Crazy Dad's Weekend, where people would fly from all over the country, stay at our house, and we'd go to a local high school, and all the kids would be crying by the time the workout was over, and we'd do a hard weekend camp basically. And that turned into normality for a lot of us, like the David Taylors, the Stiebers. You look at all these guys, they were all coming to our stuff. And my dad was putting all this stuff together. So Wayne the Pain was definitely crazy, but he was smart when it came to what needed to be done by bringing everybody together to the best of the best. And nowadays kids do have that with the RTCs and the really good wrestling clubs all over the place. And so it is definitely a different time period. I mean, I'm not old, but I'm old for wrestling. So that's definitely a long time ago compared to now.
Well, it is a little while back. And, you were part of that first class that came in when Tom Ryan was hired at Ohio State.
Yeah.
You guys were kind of the ones that, kind of changed the course. I think the course of the program there. So let's talk about Tom.
Okay.
Yeah, I love Tom. It's been great to get work with him over the years. I want to hear a good Tom Ryan story.
Well, it's funny you say that because I have a story from Monday afternoon. So I was
I was expecting one from 10 years ago, but let's hear Monday afternoon.
I got tons of them, but we don't have enough time for
No,
them.
let's hear Monday afternoon. This will be good.
Monday afternoon, I'm sitting there at baggage claim. I just got back from Dallas from the Worlds, waiting for my bags to come out. And I'm sitting there because I'm loading up an Uber or whatever it was. And he comes walking by with his mask on. And I knew it was him right away because Tom's goofy. He just walks up to me like, "Hey, man, I just saw you on social media. Now I see you in person." Like, I was like, "Yeah, Tom, that's how it goes." But he's like, he was coming from somewhere else. I don't know where, but he was like, "I'm late for practice. I got to get to practice." He's like, "You should stop by." I'm like, "I can't today, but I'll stop by within the next week or two, whatever." Just having a quick conversation. He's like, "So our plane got delayed. That's why I'm late getting here and getting to practice because I know the pilot. The pilot's a wrestler." I was like, "Oh, okay, cool." I was like, "That's why the plane was delayed." He's like, "No." He texted me and told me that this lady on the plane had a vibrator and it was a lithium ion battery. So they had to find it and get it off the plane. And that's why we were delayed." And I was like, "What the fuck?" Like, one, how did somebody know that was on the plane?
Right.
Like, I have no idea.
Did she pull the vibrator out on the plane?
Well, that's what I want to know. The next thing I said was like, "Well, was she in the bathroom using it?" And he just starts dying laughing. He's like, "I got to go to practice." And then he just left. But that's classic Tom. Just like you see him randomly out of nowhere. And then like he's just all over the place because he's thinking a million different things. Like he's a head coach and he's just always got so much on his plate. But it's funny, like every time I see Tom, it's like, him and I always have the funniest conversations and best conversations just because it's always like in passing or even like when we're just texting or on the phone talking to each other. Like he called me about a guy that they were trying to get from another school who was I don't know what they call it now, free agent or whatever the heck it is nowadays with the NIL stuff. But he's like, "Hey, what do you think of this guy?" Or, "Yeah, I've heard this, I've heard that." And I'm just like, we have good conversations about stuff, and some stuff obviously you can't talk about just because it's NCAA stuff, but it's like every time I talk to Tom, I just laugh. I'm just like, that's Tom. Like every time you talk to him, like anyone that knows Tom just knows exactly what I mean when I say that, because you're like, if you know him, you know his personality, you know how spazzy he is when he talks, and you're just like, the guy just cracks me up every time I see him. And I laughed to myself for 20 minutes after he left, and I'm just like, this dude just tells me this story randomly in passing when I see him in the airport. Like only Tom could just have that kind of stuff happen to him.
Yeah, so you'll like this story. I just saw Tom a few weeks ago, and you and anyone else that's ever wrestled for Tom will know this is classic Tom right here. So we go out to lunch, and I had sent him the pictures from Brian Peters' house, the guy you met this morning of us doing the Wim Hof Method, the ice bath, the sauna. I said, "Hey, you got to meet this guy. I think you would really dig it," because I was taking, Romero and some of these other guys to him on their like recovery day. So I take Tom. Tom's our own treat. He wants to learn all about the science of it or whatever. And the protocol is, we do this ice bath. You get in it for 3 minutes. You're up to your neck. You got all this breathing and stuff you do. Then you go into the 200-degree sauna for like 15 minutes. You go back and forth 3 times. And the first time Tom gets in the ice, he was like scared to get in, could barely get in.
Deep breathing and everything.
Yeah, he was like hyperventilating. Brian's there coaching through the breathing or whatever. Well, we get through 3 cycles of this, but on the 3rd cycle, now when you get out of the sauna for the last one, you hold your nose and you go under the ice.
Oh, nice.
And you got to hold your breath under the ice. And this is the most difficult part of it for me because you feel like you're panicking.
Yeah.
And I've only made it like maybe 40 seconds. I haven't made it a minute yet. And now I got, 2 of my guys that are in incredible shape, Clay Reeves and Dylan D'Amelio. They went and they made it like, I think like a minute 30.
Dang.
And it was just like, holy shit.
Doing that alone is hard.
Yeah, but
without being an ice bath and a sauna. And
Yeah, and there's
everything
so
else.
much ice. Like when you're way under the water, but you feel the ice on your face even, you
Yeah.
know? So Tom goes last. I'm thinking like, oh, I wonder if he'll make it as long as I did, like 40 seconds. He made it a minute 58. So
No way.
yeah, so like it got to the point, like it gets to like a minute 30. And you got to remember, like an hour before this, he could barely stand the ice.
Yeah.
You know, he was like freaking out over it. Now he's under there, and I'm thinking, did he pass out? Like, did he have a stroke or something? Like, he's not moving at all. So I like grab his foot because you're like, got your feet up in the air and you're laying back.
Yeah.
I kind of grab his foot and like shake it, and he like gives us like a little nod. I'm like, all right, he's okay. So he made it. I mean, you don't know what time it is when you're under there.
Yeah.
So he made it, you know, just right under 2 minutes, which is
Dang.
hard to even just hold your breath. And I
That's
thought,
what I'm saying. That's crazy.
But that's just the way he's wired. Like, I think he just thought, number one, I'm going to beat all these guys, and I'll stay under there until I drown.
Until I die. Yeah. Well, that's exactly what I was gonna say. And with Tom, like he's done marathons, he's done the Pelotonia or whatever it's called for the bike riding, like 100 miles or whatever. It's like Tom's got that sicko attitude. I mean, he's an Iowa guy. Like he wrestled at Syracuse, then went to Iowa and Big Ten champ. Like he has that same mentality of just like get it done at all costs, no matter what. And that's what he brings into his coaching. Is when he came in 2010 or 2006 with me and the rest of the group, that was the goal, to change that program into what it is today. And it's recruiting different guys with different values, but also recruiting the mentality. And not just the skill set, but you have to have that mentality, and it has to be your support system with your parents or your aunt and uncle or whoever you grew up with and live with throughout that time period. Those people have to be in that same mindset to be able to support you. And so seeing them recruiting and doing all the things they're doing with the team that Ohio State Wrestling is now is why it's grown so much. That's why they have a beautiful new building. That's why they have all these donors and people, because they have the right group of people. And obviously, like Woody Hayes says, you win with people. And he took that 100% to heart and put it under his wing and started recruiting and building the program that way. And the people that didn't buy into it right away, and you know, they're people that I'm still great friends with now, those people quit early on my freshman year. And it was just that's not why they went there, or that wasn't their goal going there. And they're recruited by different coaches, obviously. So the people that bought into it, even though at first we're like, oh, this, you know, sometimes we're like, Tom's a dork, you know, he said some goofy stuff, but knowing that that's why he was saying those things and doing those things, you look back at it now and you're like, well, that's why they're where they are now, because of the group of people and the mindset that he has. And so when you say a minute 58 under the water, it doesn't surprise me at all, just because Tom is a guy who will die just to get the longest time in there.
I think part of the reason me and Tom always get along so well is I got a little bit of that sicko-ness in me too. And I mean, the difference is with me, I've never really been like elite at anything, but I do have like an elite like sicko. Yeah, I'm elite as a sicko. But I've made the mistake before of trying to like break him on a bike workout when we're like side by side, and it always backfires.
Yeah.
Because I think he's willing to go just a little bit darker than I am, or just is able to for whatever reason. Yeah. So when you try to break Tom on a bike or on anything, it's going to backfire.
Yeah. Like going into those depths of hell in any workout, and you have like Tom is one of those guys too. Is like Lou was always the sicko where he'll tell you you're being a pussy or not, like right to your face. But Tom's one of those guys who's like, he's more quiet about it. But when you really get that fire lit under him, or you get him in a situation like that, like he just won't stop until it's done or he goes down. Like there's no in between. And he's always been that way.
And it's funny because so many people, I think, especially when you see them circling back to social media, I think so many people try to portray that. And when I see it, I think like, you don't really mean that. You're not really about that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? No, you just want to like take a mirror selfie of you flexing and act like you're like a ride or die.
Good
but like
quote.
Yeah, exactly. But like,
there.
no, like a guy like Tom Ryan, like that's who he is to the fucking core.
Exactly.
You know?
And he doesn't even post about that really. No. He'll post sometimes talk about suffering, but mainly it's some sort of religious quote or things about the sun rising or like living life as a whole, and which is awesome because somebody who's that much of a sicko who believes in a higher power like that, and that's all in one body. Like, it's just crazy to think of that.
No, he's a dynamic
Because
individual.
you think
for
that
sure.
you have to always be in that mindset, but you don't. You can flip. Some people can't, but myself, I have the ability to flip the switch from being a jokester to being serious to really digging down and getting in that mentality that I need to right when I walk out in the cage. Like, there's some people that can't do that. They either have it on all the time or it doesn't come on. So it's the sicko attitude is definitely, it's a trait that not everybody has.
Well, I think this is one of those things that we could probably do a whole separate podcast on, the sicko. We might have to do a next episode on the sicko mentality.
Yep.
And we'll think of who we can invite on as like our third guest on that.
For sure.
I could probably talk about a lot of this stuff with you for a long time, but I know, like, you know, time's short today. You got a business to go run. You know, you're not just going to like sit in your Lamborghini and drink Hennessy or whatever rich people do.
I'm just going to race it to this next meeting right now so I'm not late. But
I do got 3 questions I got to ask you. Now, these are very short ones, but I like to ask everyone that comes on, just kind of tie it back to the wrestling strength. And, you know, you can give me kind of, you know, short answers on them too. So the first thing I like to ask is, you know, what is one of your most memorable workouts? You've trained with high-level people all over the world. You've done lots of cool stuff. I mean, I got lots of cool workouts, not just that you and I have done, but like, you know, me and Clay Guida, one time we were in Texas and we ran 5 miles and we were hot. So we swam across the Colorado River and just left our shoes and our phone on the side of the river, and like boats are speeding by us and shit. So I've done like a lot of cool workouts like that. What's one of the most memorable or one of your favorite workouts you've ever done?
I would say one of the most memorable workouts I've done is probably when I was training at the Olympic Training Center. I did like a week-long training camp there with some of the guys training for the Worlds. And this was back in 2008, so it would have been the Olympics. And
so you were still in school at this time?
Yeah, I was a sophomore in school at the time, or just finished sophomore year or whatever. And and elevation's high there. So that was like my first time really dealing with training at elevation. And we did the cog, and it's basically an incline, and it's like, I mean, you think you see the top of it at where the clouds start, and that's like the false peak, and then you go up even more than that. But we're doing it with all these guys who are basically competing at the Olympic. Heskett was one of the guys, and a couple other guys, and Bono was another guy, and Zadok, and all these guys. Like Kevin Jackson was the coach at the time, I think, and we're running this thing, and I'm just like, I'm thinking like, I'm a young kid, college kid. I'm in shape, sort of. We were in the off season, but I was still in, you know, good shape. And all these guys, I'm like trying to keep up with all these guys who are going to the Olympics or, you know, trying to be Olympians. And I'm
trying to reach the top of the mountain.
Yeah.
Like, you need any better metaphor than that?
Exactly. Like, everybody's trying to reach the top of the mountain first. And it was like, get to this point, I'm like, oh, I think I'm close. Like, keeping up with these guys. And then we get to that false peak, and you get through the clouds, and you're like, oh, shit, I still got to go another, 10, 15 minutes that way with a full sprint if possible. And then obviously, like, some of the bigger guys or guys that are out of shape started slowing down and walking up it or, like, taking a break in between. But you got these other guys like Heskett and the top dogs who are just pushing, like, grinding to get to the top. And I'm like, I'm not going to slow down. And obviously at this point they had passed me because they've been there for, a couple months trying
they're acclimated to
it. To the elevation, and their cardio's already there. But I'm just like trying to stay within range of where I can like be close enough, but I'm not going to catch them. And getting to the top of that and just like having this like euphoric feeling of being done, but also you want to die at the same time. You're like, fuck, I'm going to die on the top of this mountain in Colorado. I haven't even lived my life yet. Like, my whole life flashed before my eyes. And I was just like, that's probably why it was so memorable, because it was like, it was during an Olympic year and all those guys were running it at the same time. And I'm just like running towards your goals was kind of like what I was thinking. I was like, damn, this is so cool.
That's what I'm saying. Like, when they make like a movie about your life, that'll be a scene that they'll put in there, and they'll be like, have the cheesy music. It'll be like, oh, look, he's reaching for his goals, striving for greatness. You know?
And then the false peak is the metaphor of like negative things that can happen or bad things that can happen along the path.
Or that you think you've already made it, but you're not there yet.
But you still got this much more to go.
That false peak's a mother. I actually did it this summer for the first time.
It's brutal.
It's insane. We literally got off the plane in Denver and drove 2 hours down there and did it.
Dang.
I was hurting. So, but That was a great story. I was hoping you'd pick something like that. What other,
I think they made that. I think the reason it was so hard is because the goal for the coach to make those guys make it up to the top was like 30 minutes or less. So that's why it became so tough, because I don't remember how long it took to get up there. But
my goal, I did some reading online about like what is considered good times, was considered elite, and so in my head I wanted to get in the 20s. I wanted to get sub 30.
Nice.
And I was on par for that probably until the false peak, but I wasn't acclimated to the
elevation
to the elevation
and
at all. And then I ended up having to take quite a few breaks during the false peak.
Oh, yeah.
So I ended up being like 35, 36 minutes or something like that, which still is not a terrible time.
for not training it.
Yeah, so
once you do it a couple times, I think, and stay up there, I think you could easily get that.
Yeah.
Like,
But so I think even if you were acclimated to the elevation, to say like, all right, we're gonna make this in under 30 minutes, you got to be a dog and in really good shape.
100%.
So anyway, incredible story there. 2 more quick ones, and these ones will be super quick. All right, tying it back to wrestling strength. If you could pick one exercise or drill or something that you feel like had the biggest impact on your wrestling strength, what would it be?
This is actually pretty easy, I think. Probably the circuit. We used to do a circuit that was you lay on your back, rope pull in, push it back out with the sled.
I remember Picasso
and then
used to do
drag it
something
back.
like this.
Yeah, and it was like, I think you and I did it a few times, but we did a couple different variations of it. But it was like getting it done within a couple minutes, or like 3 or 4 minutes or something under the time, and then finishing with ball slams or something. And I think that was really tough, because there was one where we did it standing sometimes too, where like you have to stay straight on and not like twist your body to pull the rope. And we had weights on the sled, and then you had to push it down, and then getting it back. I don't remember what we did to get it back down to, but it was one of those things where you really had to dig deep to do it, and your muscles are burning, and you're using your upper body and lower body. And I think for wrestling, the full body strength, like obviously you do your accessory stuff in each body part, but your full body strength stuff with a cardio circuit on top of it there's nothing better than that for wrestling.
Sled work, ropes, med balls, stuff
Make
like that.
your muscles and your lungs as tired as you can within 6 or 8 minute period as like that circuit. And it's like you just mimicked a wrestling match at the toughest pace that you could get.
All right. What's one thing you think that either the parents and coaches should stop doing with their wrestlers, especially youth wrestlers?
Oh, God.
What's the thing? Whether it's a drill or whether it's an attitude or whatever it is, what are these coaches doing wrong? What are these parents doing wrong? What's the one thing they need to quit doing? Colin talked about, having kids cut weight at a young age or whatever. I mean, that's kind of like an obvious one.
Yeah. I would say they need to stop making it cookie cutter. Every kid is different. No matter, like, my brother and I are from the same bloodline, and we're different, like mentality, work-wise, discipline-wise. And I think each kid that you have, and this is hard to do as a coach, but as a parent, it's not that hard because you're with them every day. If you're noticing that your kid doesn't respond well to the way that you're trying to push them or the way that you're trying to talk to them, not even just in wrestling, but just in general, find the way that they're going to respond better to motivate them. Like, yelling at the kid isn't, like, some kids do better than others with being yelled at, of like, okay, I'll go harder or do whatever. But some kids just don't respond well to that. Some kids break when that happens. So even though not every kid is going to have a bulletproof mentality, and that's just the way it is, especially, the way kids are raised nowadays with, all the social media that we talked about and everything else. I think each kid has to be individually pushed differently than others. And it sounds kind of cheesy sometimes to say that, because like, oh, wrestling's a tough sport. Well, yeah, it's already a tough sport. Don't make it tougher on the kid by trying to beat them down with your words when they may need a different type of motivation.
Every kid's so different.
Every kid. I mean, you have 2 kids. Both of those kids are probably so different on each spectrum.
They are completely different.
Yeah.
It's unreal.
So trying to coach a group of 25 kids the same exact way. Yeah, in the training, maybe, put them all through the same thing because that's just the way practices go. But mentally, like if you're trying to talk to a kid, like, hey, you need to pick it up or you need to do this, or like there's certain kids that just, whatever, they're not going to listen to that. You have to pull them to the side and be like, hey, what's going on? Or maybe it's something outside of the motivation. Maybe they just need somebody else to talk to for a split second. Like, hey, this is where we come to, get away from the problems. And this is where we come to, have the freedom to let out aggression or whatever it is, Talking to kids differently based off of their personality is going to be the biggest successor you could do as a coach or parent more than anything else.
Lance, this was awesome, man.
Boom. That was sick.
Yeah, I think we got to end on that one right there. That was perfect. Where can everyone find you at? And if you want to give like a shout out to any of your sponsors, anything like that.
For sure.
Give a thanks to your wife for making and birthing that baby, all that good stuff.
Exactly. She did all the work.
Yep.
I only did a little bit in the beginning.
Yeah.
You can find me on Facebook at Lance Palmer MMA. Twitter and Instagram are at Lance Palmer. Go ahead, give a follow, like, comment. I follow a lot of people back if they ask, whatever. People like followers or whatever. It's all good. And then I just like to thank all the people that support me through everything. There's the ups, the downs, people who are always, messaging me on social media saying, hey, man, I watch all your fights, or I watch your wrestling career. I'm a supporter of you, win or lose. Those are the people that I like. Those are the people that I really care what they think. The people that like to talk crap when you have a bad day in the cage or in the gym or whatever, those aren't the people that matter. It's the people that are there for you through the ups and downs. So I really appreciate those people who, come through and post or comment or message me. And then obviously my family, close supporters and coaches, and definitely my wife. She's been through this circus and this roller coaster ride for 11 years now. We were talking about it last night. It's like, it's crazy that we met in college and I was just a wrestler, and she's like, I don't know if I want to get involved with this guy. He's like, one, I just broke up with a girl I dated for 3 years before that. And then I was just this crazy wrestler and liked to party on campus and, kind of turned myself into a real human being, and I couldn't have done it without her. So, and she's been awesome through the whole process. Like, she supports me 100% in everything that I've wanted to do. And even the move to California and the move back to Ohio, and, and she's done a great job so far with our daughter. I was gone for fight camp basically the first 4 months of Maya's life. So she really hunkered down and took it in and did everything that I wasn't able to be there to do. So she definitely, she earned her stripes.
She earned those flowers on Mother's Day.
Exactly.
Shout out to Jessie. Good job.
Heck yeah. She's the real champ.